Oh, perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So as I said, Morley and I are usually meeting at this time each week talking about all sorts of different things. And for the month of July, we've been talking about copper, which is what we're here for today. We're here to talk about copper and specifically the Recuperate IQ copper supplement. And so we've got a few things in store for you today. We've got an hour carved out in our schedule. We've got both Morley and Christiane here, and I have volunteered to be a little case study for you all, because personally I am fairly new-ish to implementing the RCP, and then we've got the opportunity to compare that to Christiane, who is absolutely not new at all. So did you want to add anything to that, Christiane or Morley?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. I'm looking forward to having a three-way discussion and welcoming everyone for a bit of a different event to what we often do. So it's nice to do, we do Q&As twice a month. We've got another one of those for our community tomorrow, but this is a different style, so it's exciting.
It is very exciting. And I just want folks to know that we will obviously be talking about the Recuperate product. And we're very pleased to have the manufacturer there. Mike Casey is in front of his beautiful painting with his very subtle t-shirt that says FAQ, for those of you who wonder what that's all about. But Mike, thank you for joining us, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to pull him into some of the discussion as well. So who knows where this conversation is going to go, but we're looking forward to it nonetheless. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So what we'll begin with is, I think we'll dive straight on into that case study. So what we'll do is Morley is just going to ask me a series of questions, and if Christiane needs to chime in, she can. She's also doing some really great ninja work in the chat box and managing all of the participant stuff as well. So yeah, ask away, Morley. What would you like to know to determine whether this supplement is something that's suitable for someone like me to introduce into my routine?
Well, the starting point is always, what are your health issues? What are you most focused on? Is there any part of your health and well-being that you're more intrigued by, interested in, concerned about? That's really the natural starting point for these types of conversations.
Well, I guess I'm generally fairly fit and healthy, quite a bit of exercise. And, I've just played volleyball last night. And that's probably the biggest thing for me, is getting a bit of energy and movement happening the next morning after a late night playing volleyball and feeling a bit stiff and a bit sore and a bit heavy. And then I also have some food intolerances as well. So they're the two main areas for me personally. And
how long have you had those food intolerances?
A number of years. I had some, let's see, maybe 6, 7, maybe even close to 8 years.
Oh, okay. So what was going on in your world 8 years ago?
8 years ago. Well, I was working in hospitality, and I was working with terrible shift work. So really late nights, sleeping really late. And so my body clock was really out of whack. And I was often feeding myself, quick and easy meals just to kind of keep going, and lots of stuff to feed my energy so that I could survive and work until, the wee hours of the morning in a cocktail bar. So I was stressing my body out as a result of the hours that I was doing on top of studying at university full time. So there was a lot on my plate, even though I was, 20 something.
That's a lot of stress, obviously.
Yeah.
And how about the nutritional side? Have you made changes in the last few years with what kind of food you eat, what kind you focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. I switched to gluten-free quite a number of years ago because I was experiencing quite a lot of bloating as a result of, eating lots of pastas and things that were, easy to cook and reheat in at 8 o'clock at night for a dinner shift in the middle of hospitality.
And right now, you are self-employed, which is both a blessing and a curse. So you've got all sorts of deadlines and stress around that. How do you deal with that stress? It's a different kind of stress than shift work, but it's still stressful. So how do you deal with that?
The two things that I do is I take as much care of my physical body as I possibly can with what I'm eating and what I'm doing with it. So the exercise, the movement. The other thing is I would say I tend to be a pretty fierce advocate for boundaries around working, and Christine can vouch for this because I talk about this quite a lot. So yeah, making sure that I'm not working into the wee hours like I once was when I was in my hospitality days, and having some strict guidelines around, you know, my clients don't expect to hear from me on a weekend or on an evening and things like that.
So when you hit the wall in terms of needing energy, what do you typically do? What's your go-to formula to try to regain and rebound from a either stressful day at the volleyball court or a stressful day at work? But what's your typical pattern for recovery?
When it's really stressful, I tend to resort to a float tank because I'm very blessed to have one very close to me. Float tank or sauna, just something to kind of get out of the work mode where I literally cannot work, take myself away from any devices and not be able to access anything at all.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that we're learning in this work that we do is the importance of being able to generate energy to deal with the stress. And so a float tank is beautiful. I mean, you get to just kind of detach from the world, and you're going to be immersed in a lot of magnesium, which is lovely. The other side of it is there's a need for copper too. I mean, those are not the only two minerals, but boy, if you want to make energy, those would be two that you want to focus on. So do you have a go-to source for copper that you found to be helpful, either dietary or supplement or anything like that?
No, and I guess I don't know enough about that to answer that question confidently.
Yeah, and I think that part of the purpose in our wanting to have this conversation is, even though Shanae is well versed in the world of RCP, she's not gone through the course. She certainly has a working knowledge of what we do, but she really is, as she deems it, she's a newbie. She's new to this, and we wanted to use her as a prime example of. I'm sure there are others that are listening in on this who are like, what is this copper thing I keep hearing about? Because it's, I think it's the best kept secret on the planet. I think Christine and Mike certainly agree with that. Any one of the students who've gone through the course would certainly agree with that as well. And practitioners who are probably are aware of it as well. But the thing is that it's the hidden factor in stress that when we are under real intense stress, our cortisol is going to change. Our cortisol is going to start to express more consistently. Cortisol is no friend to copper. So that when we have a pattern of stress that triggers an erratic pattern of cortisol, you're going to see a 4 to 5-fold increase in metallothionein protein. You're like, what's that? Well, that's the protein that binds up copper 1,000 times stronger than it binds up zinc. And suddenly you've just altered the body's natural ability to respond to stress, because that's really what the whole response to stress is built on, being able to respond to the threat, whether it's, you know, in the moment of a volleyball match, or whether it's some deadline that has to be met, or some argument that you've had with someone. You've got to be able to respond and bounce back, and the body is going to draw on needing to produce energy to do that. And so outside of a very pristine diet, you don't have a lot of options. I mean, I think magnesium is relatively easy to supplement. There are a lot of different sources, and people seem to be pretty well versed on that. Copper is sort of the unknown, the great unknown. And while historically there have been a lot of foods that have offered copper, I think those have been altered by modern farming and food processing techniques. So, Shanae, have you had a chance to even work with the the Recuperate product? Has that been something that you've even experimented with at this point?
I have a bottle from Christan, but I thought I would wait to be here today to find out. I mean, I'm assuming the answers are going to lead towards yes, that it would be something suitable for me. Cat's out of the bag, right? But I wanted to have this conversation before I introduced it into my routine.
Yeah, no, I respect that. And for those who were like, oh, this is just a big setup. No, we like, we hooked up about 3 minutes before we jumped onto this call. We said, we're just going to do the case study in vivo and just see what happens.
Yeah.
Now, other options that you have are food-based options. Ones that are mentioned in the protocol are bee pollen and whole food vitamin C, and everyone's favorite, beef liver, right? And I know you love that. As a vegetarian, that's an easy one, right?
Huge priority for me.
No, it's I think one of the more entertaining parts of my practice is I've got about 25 vegan clients taking desiccated beef liver. That's how desperate they are to feel better. And
yeah, wow.
And I would say the sickest person I've ever dealt with was the vegan daughter of 2 vegan parents. And so it was about 60 years of no animal proteins or fats. And it was fascinating to have the conversation. And I'm in no way judging. I'm just saying she was really compromised in her health. And we really brought it back to some of these fundamental principles we talk about. But
just to jump in for a minute.
Sure, absolutely.
Knowing the background I do of Sinead, and this is why I've stayed quiet because we've known each other for so long. Sinead's been doing cod liver oil for ages, which, just as a side note for everybody who's not aware, cod liver oil has a lot of retinol in it, which helps the copper that we eat and ingest and that sort of thing to be active. So the cool thing is that Sinead's already got that regularly on board. So as she's looking to bring on the Recuperate, it's more likely to be assimilated in well and activated well within her body. So
yeah. I was just talking with a client before we started earlier this evening, and she's pregnant and she's been doing the cod liver oil as well. And she said, well, do you think after I deliver, maybe I should take this product? I said, there's only one way to find out. I think, why don't you give it a go? So she was very excited about that. And so that's important to know that at least you have that experience, Sinead. Are there any reservations that you have about taking a supplement like this? Has there been any experience with something comparable to this in the past that you might comment on?
I don't have any reservations because, I mean, I've been very beautifully influenced by Christan over the years in terms of what I've introduced. So I've got my adrenal cocktail. There's a bit of bee pollen floating in that, and some aminas as well. And I feel the best I've ever felt. Like even in the last couple of years where the world has been a little bit peculiar, I've still managed to feel pretty great. And so when you ask about reservations, no, there's no reservations for me personally, because I'm converted. But it's interesting because I suspect that there's probably a lot of people in a similar boat to me who are either in those early phases or have tried or dabbled a little bit, but aren't sure if it's right for them. What are the specifics? Like, are there any specifics, or is it? And what I've learned from our conversations this month about copper, the lives and the discussions that we've had have highlighted for me the importance of copper, and what I'm understanding, again, from my very basic level of understanding, is that it's pretty hard to get enough copper nutritionally in. So I'm like, okay, I'm on board with this idea, because if that's going to help my body, then I'm all for that. And, from the vegetarian perspective, Christan qualified this. She goes, there's beef liver in the product. And I'm okay with that. Like I'm not a hard and fast. And I think that really works. So no reservations. I perhaps wouldn't have the bottle in my kitchen downstairs if I was, not sure. But I'm really confident that there's a lot of people who are like, I'm interested, but is it right for me?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think what's amazing is to me, after a lot of research, a lot of research, hands down, it's the mineral that runs the body. I mean, everyone likes to, oh, there are 82 minerals. Yeah, but there's one that really makes a difference. And it's been whittled down into this essence of insignificance. And it's like, oh my gosh, every day I'm amazed at what we learn. So, well, I think we'll leave it there for now for you, Shanae. I think that's a very candid and honest say, I'm open, I'm willing, let's give it a go. And
Yeah.
what we can do now is begin to work with it, and over the course of the next few weeks and months, just see what you experience. I mean, I really think it's the best way to learn is just to have a firsthand experience with it. And I think what would be helpful is to get a more maybe seasoned experience from Kristan. And she obviously is no stranger to the RCP. It goes back, is it 8 years that we first met, Kristan?
Yeah, it was over 8 years. It's sort of 8.5, I think now. Start of 2014, we first met, and I had started to introduce magnesium upon finding the MAG group in mid 2013. So it's been a while. 9 years ago, I started with a tiny bit of magnesium on my body, and look where it got me now. So yeah, I always find that we learn from like the information around us, our exposure. I lead the training with you, and I always find that I learn things from doing that training. And just like when I work with clients, I often learn from the experience of having conversations with them as well. And towards middle of last year, we were having a conversation during one of those classes, and a past graduate who was doing the refresher shared that he had been using copper bisglycinate and that he'd found it really helpful, and just some of the experiences to do with that. Well, at the same time, I'd been using a food-based copper product that was helping me to, the last niggly thing that I had health-wise was migraines. They weren't common, but they started under peak stress of late 2020. They started to come back a little stronger, or they were just there still. They'd never completely gone. They'd just reduced in frequency and severity. Anyway, this food-based product was helping me. And for those who have heard of it before, it's called copper liver chelate. But the company who made that stopped making it. They apparently couldn't source suitable components for it, so they just outright stopped doing it. And I was starting to shake in my proverbial boots a bit that I didn't have something to continue with, because it had helped me massively. The migraines had completely stopped by that stage. And I was like, okay, don't want to change anything. So the long and the short is I managed to get some copper bisglycinate, which is the main copper aspect of what's in the Recuperate product. And I added it to my routine about 12 months ago when I ran out of the other product. And I went in with no preconceived anything. I wasn't sure if it was going to be compatible or was going to make any difference. But keeping in mind that I was regularly doing cod liver oil, all the whole food C, all the major bits of the RCP were all well and truly on board, long-term on board, high stress existence within my world, but also a lot of effort.
No, you don't have stress.
The yes person who's learning to be a no person a little bit more often, but it's a work in progress, a lifetime of being me, adjusting some habits with regards to how I approach stress and workload and whatever in my life. But also I'm very mindful of, like Shanae was saying, Shanae has really tight boundaries. I'm working on mine and have been, but I also do meditation. This time last year, I brought in yoga and a variety of other things regularly to give myself the time away from the screens and all the rest of it. So it was really just complementing all of that. And by the end of last year, I'm like, hang on a minute. I realized that it was making a big difference. I didn't have any migraines for all of last year after I started taking the product. And I was not having them frequently, but with high peaks of stress, that would be when I get it. And I had plenty of stress last year. Hello, COVID lockdowns and other fun stuff around us. And then what was it? I said to you 2 months ago, my husband, we had spares, but he didn't realize that he'd stopped putting it out in our little supplement cups. And I stopped getting my daily extra bit of copper because at that point we still didn't have any of your Recuperate in our little stash of supplements. And I've since rectified that. Cue product placement. This is what we're talking about, everyone, if you want to see what the bottle looks like. So
Takes a while for it to swim over to Australia, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's got a lot of bubbling to do it. No, it's irony is it's called Christine was too busy to get herself organized to talk to Mike to get it over and ordered. But anyway, my darling husband, Scott, forgot to get the new bottle and continue. So all of a sudden I started getting headachy and pain. There's certain aches and pains that I hadn't realized were gone, things to do with my feet. I've got long-term injuries in my neck and back. So in the RCP as a whole, lots of those chronic pain things that I'd literally had since I was a kid, a teenager, a few too many falls off horses, that sort of thing. And they hadn't been irritating me at all. And within 10 days of forgetting to include, that's right, it was my birthday week. Thanks for that, hubby. Leave out the copper in my birthday week. And I wondered why I was aching. Bit too much of the good stuff around birthday celebrations. I don't know. Anyway, within a few days of bringing them back into our routine, once we realized that it had been left out and those things went away, and the achy feet especially, that was one thing, and the headachy sort of fuzzy feeling. So I hadn't really put that much anticipation of what it might have helped, but it generally has brought down a lot of the inflammation. And there's lots of moving parts in my life at any point. So I wasn't sure where it was at, what part of it was playing, but I think generally it's kept the inflammation down significantly. So I've brought in the Recuperate in the last 3 weeks, I think. And I was already having 3 milligrams per day of copper through the other products that I'd been using. And I've found that so far I'm on 2 per day, which is 4 milligrams of the Recuperate. And that seems to have taken on where I was at with the other. So my body is only singing. In my early 40s, my body is less inflamed and functioning better, even under higher stress and with all the things, every part of hormones, focus, headaches be gone. And for anyone who has a history of headaches and migraines where it goes through 3 or more generations like it does in my family, it was always, well, you're just going to have headaches, you're just going to have migraines, that's just what your life is. And I've reversed that. So I'm the first in 3 generations to still have my uterus in my early 40s. I don't get chronic migraines anymore, and I'm confident that the RCP as a whole works together in a synergy, but I think that the copper has really kind of rounded that off.
And from my standpoint, what's most intriguing about this is I wasn't aware that, even though Christine and I talk twice a week, sometimes, well, at least 3 times a week when we're having classes, I wasn't aware that she'd been working with this copper bisglycinate. And then when Mike and I decided to come up with this product, and the product really is a revenge to COVID, folks. And for those who don't know, I've renamed COVID. COV stands for coppers vanished. ID stands for irons dysregulated. If you really understand the symptoms of COVID, those 2 minerals are at the thick of it. When you understand that the spike protein destroys the beta globulin on hemoglobin to cause iron to get dislodged, that's a serious problem. So it's a very interesting dynamic the last few years, but this product is really, I think, inspired by the events, the global events that we've all been enduring. But what was fascinating is I was not aware of Christine's science experiment, that suddenly she went, well, you know, I've been having some great experience. I'm like, yes, that's fantastic. So this has been a very gradual process of kind of lifting the basket so people can see more of the light about what the copper product is about. And we've had this series of conversations to kind of open up the dialogue and give people a chance to get more familiar with it, get more comfortable with it. And then we thought tonight what we would do is lead with these two almost diametrically opposed experiences, just to give you a sense of the yin yang that's out there, but then really open it up. We've got a number of questions that have been identified, and we're going to answer a series of questions that have come up, but then open it up to the group, because I'm sure that we're not going to answer all of your questions, but wanted to at least have this chance to open up the dialogue with these case studies, and then jump into answering some of the questions. And then I'm sure we're going to have close to 30 minutes to answer other questions that I'm sure you all will have. And this will not be the only time we do this, but we wanted to at least have this initial foray into the Q&A side, if you will. So before I do that, any comments, Shanae or Christiane, before we dive into the Q&A side of it?
I think the only thing I want to add is I did experiment on me. I'm always the guinea pig first. So in our household, I did it for me for a long time before anyone else. And then I actually brought it into my family. So my kids are currently 9 and 2 15-year-olds, as well as my husband. And all of us are using some copper bisglycinate every day. For me, recently, it's been the Recuperate, because I always bring in things on me first. That's been how I've done it the entire time. But I'll be switching the whole family towards the Recuperate with time as well. There are some questions, some great questions in the chat, but what I'm going to suggest, Morley, is that we do those other ones that you've got ready to go, because I think a lot of those will be answered during those slides.
Yeah, and then we should have enough time to get to the in vivo questions as well. So let's go ahead and do that.
And just while you're doing that, keep in mind, everyone, if you're joining us via the Zoom session, you will be provided with a link to the recording of this for afterwards. So you will have the opportunity, if we zip through things quite quickly, you will get that opportunity later to be able to re-watch it later. So.
Okay, so we're just going to go through some basic questions just so people have a good sense of orientation. What are optimal levels of copper? It's a great question. You can take anywhere from 2 to 5 milligrams a day. I mean, what's interesting is to go back into the research into the 20s and 30s, and you'll see that they were recommending as much as 10 milligrams a day back in the 30s. That was not at all unusual. With more contemporary guidelines, the upper limit now is set at 10 milligrams a day. You can probably go beyond that, but that's what seems to be a recognized limit. And then we thought it'd be useful to give you a sense of some of the blood ranges that we work with within the RCP. Serum copper, we shoot for 100. It tends to be either below it, well below it, or well above it for a wide variety of reasons. But then we also are very focused on ceruloplasmin. I'm sure you all are aware of that. That, of course, is the sky blue protein that's in our blood. Cerulo, sky blue, and we're shooting for 30 units of that. And what we're really looking for is a ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin of 3.33. So that's really those are the reference levels that we're looking for in terms of optimal expectations for the clients that we work with. The best form of copper to supplement, it's a loaded question. We were waiting for that one to come up. As you well know, there are many different forms of copper supplements. Lauren Pickard has an amazing copper cream, skin biology or reverse skin aging. The X39 patch, based on his GHK peptide. In talking with Robert Thompson, who's a huge proponent of that, and others. A new entrant, as you probably are aware of, copper hydrosol from the folks that bring us the silver products, have now taken a dive into copper, and it seems to be having some real good impact. One of my good friends here in North Carolina said to me last night, she says, you know, I'm feeling really good. I can't believe how much better I feel with the protocol. She says, but I took some of that copper hydrosol. She says, it was like a light switch went on. I said, great. She says, do you think I'd have the same effect using the Recuperate. I said, only one way to find out. So she's very excited about using that. But what we've decided to do is go down a different path with the copper bisglycinate. It's a very bioavailable form because of its unique chelation properties, 2 molecules of glycine. For those of you who may not know, glycine is very important to making ceruloplasmin. There's actually 16 conserved glycine. What does the word conserved means? It means they're really important. It means they've been conserved through evolution for a long time. The other side of it is that the substance that you may know about, Roundup or glyphosate, according to my conversation with Stephanie Seneff several years ago, she said, it'd be good for you to know, Morley, that glyphosate is glycine with a nitrogen wart on it. I went, wow, that was a life-changing conversation. So we think there's value in bringing glycine preemptively into the process. And it's a non-essential, but boy, is it important. And it's very important for gut health. And I think many of you have had that experience with. And we just think that it's just a really good formulation in terms of its design to give us the mineral that we're looking for with a carrier protein, the glycine, that I think is going to help people. Another form that people have had experience with is copper orotate. I've not had personal experience with that, but I've heard that people, especially in Europe, have found that to be a very useful form. Have the ingredients in the Recuperate IQ been tested for heavy metals? It's a great question. We do both in-house and third-party testing to ensure all the ingredients are free of heavy metals. And it's an important issue. What I think is fascinating, a lot of people may not know this. A lot of people have had experience with, chelation therapy, EDTA. And what they may not know is that when you're doing chelation therapy, they're going to take out what are called the heavy metals. Well, one of the heavy metals that's going to be taken out is copper. But there's another heavy metal that never leaves with those chelation therapies, and that's iron. And we take the stance that of all the heavy metals that you should be worried about, iron is the one that doesn't go out with chelation. The only way to get rid of iron is through blood loss. So I just wanted to point that out for the crowd. People are aware of the fact that our product does have spirulina in it. Of course, it's desiccated beef liver, spirulina, a dash of turmeric, and then, of course, the 2 milligrams of copper bisglycinate. A lot of negative press out there about spirulina, but a lot of it is, where was it farmed? Where was it harvested? And we're very careful about the form that we're using is coming from a very pristine bed in Hawaii. And so we're very confident that it's free of the neurotoxins that people are worried about. So I guess we should call Hawaii domestic, even though it's off the mainland, but it is a domestic product that we're very, very comfortable with. Is it possible to get enough copper from food sources? This is the $64 million question, because that was the position for a long time. And I think what really converged, I was beginning to have my doubts before COVID started. But then as I began to really understand what COVID was about, and again, who was talking about copper in COVID? Nobody, but the RCP. Who was talking about copper in the immune system? Nobody. Very well, there were like 2 or 3 research studies over the 2-year period, but most people were going a very different route. And we began to really question the validity of the food sources, only because of changes in the farming system. Dramatic changes have occurred since the 90s. I think you all know that. That's a 30-year period of agrochemicals that have ravaged the mineral content of the soils. And there seems to be a real target for copper and also magnesium, but copper certainly by virtue of how little we need and how important it is it seems to have a disproportionate focus on the part of the farming community. And glyphosate is a perfect copper chelator. It chelates other minerals, but it will chelate it down to a pH of 1. And so the foods that are all GMO, things like sugar beets and alfalfa and potatoes and things like that, that were staples for our ancestors and they were sources of copper, they don't have copper now because they're farmed with glyphosate. So it's a very different world out there. And that, I think, that knowledge and the awareness of that, coupled with what I began to reflect on about COVID, said it's time for us to begin to introduce in a much more formal way a product. And so technically, yeah, you can get copper from the food, but boy, you've got to know the farming practices of the farmers that you're buying your food from. I think you've got to have a very personal relationship. You've got to know, what are they doing to feed the soil? What are they doing for the food processors? What are they doing to alter the mineral composition? Because that's what refining does. And so I think it's very unlikely that in this modern era, we're going to find a ready-made source of food that you can get fresh off the farm and get the level of copper that we think is needed. Because I think we're a leg down now, folks. It's not just the stress that we're under. I think there's been a lot of impact that this condition that people have been dealing with over the last couple of years has altered our mineral composition. And Kristan and I and others who are on this call who've taken the course and deal with clients regularly, there's been a dramatic change in mineral composition as a result of the infections that people have had. So I think it's just something to be aware of as you're contemplating this decision. How to optimize the absorption of copper? Great question. One of the reasons why we chose to chelate it was to optimize its absorption. Again, as soon as again, we're working with a product that's made by Albion Minerals, which is a very large and very successful mineral company. Probably virtually all of the minerals that you're working with in your supplement routine are manufactured by Albion. I mean, it has a very large footprint around the world. But I think what we're really trying to do is make sure that this particular form is going to optimize its absorption and really help people deal with the gut inflammation that seems to get in the way of the absorption of other minerals and vitamins that people are trying to deal with. So the glycine has a particularly good track record in that regard. Another way is making sure that we're combining it with food ingredients. I mean, it's a very conscious decision to incorporate the copper with the desiccated beef liver and with the spirulina, and of course with the turmeric. The beef liver and the spirulina, they're very rich sources of copper, which is, again, we're trying to take advantage of that wherever possible. The idea behind the turmeric is really to help cut back the inflammation. It has a legendary track record of helping people just address that particular affliction. And it's just that once you've dealt with the inflammation, then you can optimize the absorption. And that's really the focus of the product. And lastly, the whole idea is we want folks to go low and slow. I mean, we could easily have come out with a 4 or 6 milligram copper supplement. I think the market would have been aghast, but we think it's better for people to go low and really ease into this, and then just begin to experience it the way Kristan has, and the way many other people are experiencing it now. And then of course, you want to have the input of your healthcare practitioner, whoever that might be, whether it's a physician or it's a nutritionist or some functional doctor that you're working with. I think that the challenge that you might face is they may not have the full breadth of understanding of copper's reach in the body. And there's still a lot of mythology out there about copper toxicity. Got to be mindful of that. But I think it's important that people recognize that this is a product that's been designed to ease into your routine and really allow for its absorption into your body as well. So someone's asking the anticipated question. I thought this was bad for the brain. I would encourage people to look into the research of Garth Cooper. He's at the University of Manchester, but he also hangs out at the University of Melbourne. So he's bimodal. He's a very talented copper researcher, despite his last name. But his far and away is one of his best articles is from 2016. Ashley Bush, who I think is probably one of the premier copper researchers on the planet, is based at the University of Melbourne. He's an MD there who leads a very prestigious team. And they've been studying copper and brain function for the better part of a decade. And then another very important article is by Catherine Cahill, particularly her work around the amyloid precursor protein. There's so much mythology out there about this. And I personally have spoken with George Brewer on 2 occasions. I don't agree with his stance that copper is booga wooga bad. I don't think he understands what lipid rafts are, or that there's external and internal aspects to copper. I think he's done a lot of good research over the years, but I don't agree with him about the fact that the copper is creating Alzheimer's. Far and away, the research that I read says it's an iron issue because there's not enough bioavailable copper. Someone's asking for the fact that we would provide clinical information for both copper and ceruloplasmin. What's the best form of copper, the dosing. I think we've pretty well answered that, but what I would just reinforce it with is that this is a central part of our consults, and it's a central part of the RCP Institute training that we do. It's a 16-week program that I'm sure you all are aware of. But I think that we've addressed the idea of the dosing already with low and slow. And I think we've given you an indication of what the ideal target references are for copper and ceruloplasmin, but certainly willing offline to have those conversations with folks if they want to dig a little deeper. Someone's asking about Jason Hommel's group, a Facebook group on the new copper revolution, where they're recommending high copper supplementation. Do we have any thoughts? Oh, of course we have thoughts. I really do admire and respect Jason's research. He's a very talented guy. Recently was in Dallas, and he was able to join us at that meeting. And he's a sharp guy. I don't happen to agree 100%. And I guess we have this mutual pact of respect, and we're not really entirely embracing everything that each other does. But I think we've taken a very different path with our approach, as opposed to using a copper salt at very high doses. I've not seen any research that would suggest that would be appropriate or necessary. And we just have differences of opinion. And vive la différence. That's what makes the world go round. But he does great research, but we don't see eye to eye, and that's fine. I think that's part of the process of discovery. So no doubt there are other questions, but we at least wanted to get through some of these basics, because we were confident that those were going to be ones that were going to kind of have the broad reach. But Christine, I'll turn it back to you, or Sinead. I'm not sure who's going to be driving the train, but what are some other questions that have surfaced that we need to be addressing and begin to address in the course of our time remaining?
There are some great questions that thankfully Sinead put together for me.
Awesome.
So let me grab the first one. You may as well stop the screen share, I think, Morley, so we can see each other a little bit easier.
Great idea. Thank you.
So Gabriella said, is Recuperate safe for breastfeeding? Which is a great one.
I don't know why it wouldn't be. And there's a lot of conservatism around supplements and breastfeeding. I mean, when I think about the amount of iron that people consume on every level, this is the supplement or this is the mineral that's going to allow them to regulate the iron. I don't know of any reason why not, but Mike, do you have any suggestions or comments about that? Have you had any direct experience with that?
The rule of supplementation is generally anything that it's a detoxification ingredient or herb you want to avoid during breastfeeding. So nothing in this would really be a contraindication, in my opinion. I think it's completely safe and something that people should be taking because most people are going to be deficient in copper, of course, and the other nutrients.
Yeah, no, it's very good way to approach it in terms of the detox side. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't. And I would think it would only enhance the infant's mineral vitality by doing it. So I think that's a wonderful perspective to bring.
And just my 2 cents worth, sometimes it's hard to know what to do or not to do when you're breastfeeding your baby, toddler, whatever age they are. I started this whole process because of my little one, who's now getting screamingly closer to 10 years old. I'm not quite sure how that quite happened. It just seems like it was yesterday she was a baby. And I started very slowly. And the more that I took care of me through more nutrients, the RCP, that helped her immensely. So go slowly with any changes. We encourage that anyway. But as a breastfeeding mum, just go really slowly. That would be my only, don't go changing multiple things at once if you are introducing it. And if you feel that it's not resonating, that it doesn't feel right for you at that point, don't do it. And that goes for everybody. If something doesn't resonate with you, don't push through it. Not unless you're going, I really feel like I need this. If there's a natural pull towards it, fine. But we're not here to push bodies through reactions or anything. If this product or anything, it doesn't matter. Don't push through. I don't think most people will have a negative response, but okay. The next question is from Sarah. Would Recuperate be appropriate for someone who had a very adverse reaction to a copper IUD?
Well, copper IUD, that's a metallic form of copper. This is going to be very different in terms of its bioavailability because of the chelation properties. I guess if you wanted to be really conservative, it would be good to do some hair testing and blood testing to see what your other minerals and vitamins status are before taking it. Again, I think the watch phrase, if you will, is going to be low and slow. And for the most part, people have had a very positive response to this. Within our community, only 1 or 2 people, and we're still sorting through why that might have happened. And Christiane, I'm blanking on what the factor was in the one case, but I think the chance of this being an issue for someone who is sensitive to the IUD, I don't think it's going to be the same response to a bioavailable form like this.
And if you were worried about it, you could, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there'd be an issue with cracking the capsule open and just starting with a little sprinkle in, mixing it with something else, put it in your food or whatever. There would be no reason why that would be a problem with their Mike, to open a capsule and just use a tiny bit at a time.
No, that's completely fine. My question would be is what was the reaction to? So obviously this is a completely form of delivery that we're doing with it. It would be what was the reaction? So I highly doubt it was the copper itself, and that's what we've kind of buffered it with, all the whole food nutrition, the glycine and everything else. So it'd be very unlikely, but like everyone keeps saying, it's just low and slow. Try a little bit, open up a capsule and just see how they react. And if they'd have a reaction, just of course, stop taking it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I think the next one I may have answered in the chat, but I think it's a great one as well. With suspected iron overload patients, it sounds like Tom is a practitioner, is there any concern with the RCP protocol mobilizing stored iron in tissue too quickly with no effective outlet to get it out of the body other than periodic blood donations? Or does some portion get out of the body via normal liver bowel function? Again, I think I've covered it partly, and really what you were saying before about low and slow and that sort of thing, I think covers it to a degree.
Yeah, I think it's a really sensitive issue that there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly in the practitioner community, about low in the blood is very different than high in the tissue. I think a lot of the reaction to iron status is looking at blood work, not thinking about what could be a completely different status of iron in the tissue that's not getting measured by the blood. What we do know is that the protocol works. It will mobilize iron, because that's what Mother Nature wanted copper to do all along. Copper was never designed, iron was never designed to be put into storage. That's not its purpose. It's meant to be in circulation, in a recycling system called the reticuloendothelial system. It was never designed to be housed in massive bunkers of ferritin. That's a modern invention that does not belong on this planet. But I think the idea of using Recuperate, is it going to overwhelm the system? There are a lot of people who we've had direct experience with iron overload, people with very, very high ferritin levels, people with iron saturations of 99%, and they're doing just fine. They have regular blood donations, regular phlebotomies. Some have done it as frequently as weekly. Many have been able to schedule it on a bi-monthly basis. But I think by doing the entire protocol and doing the regular blood donations and incorporating the Recuperate, I don't think there's going to be any issue. Again, it would be good to do that with the support of a practitioner trained in the RCP. I think that's really why we have this training programs, to make sure that people are more mindful of and sensitive to these unique aspects of trying to de-iron humanity. It's a very different process than trying to load people up with iron, which I don't think is working. But I think the individuals with iron overload should be fine using this product.
Yeah. And it would invite you, Tom, if I don't recognize your name from our practitioner training, maybe consider doing the training to understand more about the fuller picture around that side of things and the blood donations and all that sort of jazz with your clients. I think we've covered the other questions about someone that's had adverse reactions to other types of copper.
On that though, Christiane, I think again, the buzz is, oh, you take copper, you're going to have racing mind, and you're going to have all this stuff. And Mike sort of alluded to it. I think what's happening is, what does copper do? It wakes up the immune system. It wakes up the circulation. It wakes up the iron circulation system. And I think that unfortunately what's happened is a lot of the symptoms that have been attached to copper toxicity are in fact iron toxicity, but people don't understand that. They've never known what the connection is between iron and oxidative stress. And they're hand in glove together. And why does copper exist on this planet? To keep iron and oxygen in proper regulation. The wholesale misery that exists on this planet because of a lack of bioavailable copper is hard to describe. And that's what we've devoted our time to in our work around the RCP. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about copper because people have never connected the dots to the iron side of the house because they've been trained, like circus bears, to think it's a copper problem. So I think we have to really move beyond that very pedestrian perspective and begin to go upstream with what's really going on inside the body.
Yeah, yeah. And so as we near the time when we're going to be wrapping up, the last couple of questions that I'm going to bring through, there are some that are really specific and involved questions. We're not going to be able to answer them today. We do have a Q&A tomorrow, which relates specifically to copper, our webinar that we did this month, which was copper. So you can, if you're not already in our community, you could join the RCP community and join in there, and we can go into more detail. It's things like, how does copper intake regulate blood sugar, especially for type 2 diabetes? These are more in depth than what we can cover today. Today's focus is around the Recuperate product. let me just, and then Lauren Bradley has asked some really technical one relating to glucose and ketones and AMPK and all sorts of geeky stuff, Morley. You can get into that with the graduates later on.
Indeed, we'll do that with an alumni group.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Celia, not Cecilia. What is the advantage of purchasing Recuperate as opposed to a random copper bisglycinate only product? So I'm going to put my 2 cents worth in, having started with it by itself. I personally did it because there was no other product at the time. I am fine with glycinate products in general. So I use magnesium glycinate and my body is quite happy with it. So it was easy to access, but the benefit of having the other whole food components with the spirulina and the beef liver together is you get that whole food rounded aspect of it together. So Mike and Morley may be able to answer more specifically. I think your slides probably covered that actually pretty well from you've got it all delivered together in one go. If someone has a specific issue with any one component, well, maybe they are better off having it individually, but generally you're getting a well-rounded product by getting the food as well, would be my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think there's 2 levels of response that I would offer up beyond what you just shared, Christine. One is the idea of the thought that went into designing the different components of food, different components of bioavailable copper. I think that was very intentional and very comfortable with what we've come up with. I think there's a broader play, and again, I hope folks can go, be with us on this journey, because this really is a movement. This isn't just, oh, we're trying to sell some supplements and let's go about our way. When this whole movement started about a decade ago, I was bored. I didn't know what I was getting into. I really didn't. I wanted to write a book and I didn't know what the book was going to be about. I thought it was going to be about magnesium and yada, yada, yada. And so the RCP was born about 5 years ago. So it's a 5-year-old. And everyone knows what the RCP stands for: root, cause, protocol. Well, as we are getting into our stride here, we realize there's a broader play here. And the RCP is going to change in terms of what it means. There's a component that's going to be focused on research. There's a component of which is going to be focused on classroom, the educational side. And there's a focus that's going to be on products. So it's a different kind of RCP. I've befriended a very world-renowned copper expert. It turns out that his son is coming up to UNC to become a dentist. And I'm very excited to welcome him to the community. But we're having dinner again Wednesday night. And I want to talk very seriously with this professor. I'm not going to name him right now, but we're going to do some very important research to look at what happens when we add copper, because all the research that's being done worldwide is what happens if we take away the copper? What else breaks down? You have no idea the number of studies that are all about copper deficiency, copper depletion, copper deprivation. Oh, gee, that part, I didn't know that was going to break. And what we're going to do is try to reverse that and begin to say, what happens when we add, when we enhance, when we reinforce? And so the reason for why would you select Recuperate and the products that are going to be coming alongside it is that it's going to help to fund the research that we feel is needed in order to restore humanity back to its original factory settings. This is designed to be if you will, a self-serving system so that we can really have a movement here to really change the trajectory of humanity. And 10 years ago when I started this, I had no idea we would be having these types of meetings or we would be having this type of evolutionary discussion. But I think the last couple of years have really galvanized the need to change our focus and change our commitment. So I think it's a very well designed product. I'm very grateful for Mike's genius for the work he's done in this field for a couple decades, but just what he was able to bring to bear relative to this product is very unique and very special. And I think it offers us an opportunity to fund the growth of the future direction of the RCP. So that's how I would respond to that. Mike, if you want to add any quick comments, please feel free to do so. I would welcome your thoughts as well.
Sure. No, I'd love to speak for a minute because I see a lot of questions coming in, kind of watching the chat, and you've been sharing everything. And I think it's really good for a lot of people to know that this wasn't an overnight process with you by any means. I think we met probably 4 years ago, and we began these conversations of how do we make sure people get copper. And this was, a very complex behind the scenes, we really put a lot of thought into this, and still to this day, I mean, we have our weekly conversations where we talk about the new research and what is new out there, what works well with what. So everything is constantly evolving. But I think to answer and tie a lot of these questions, and I see from people coming in is, do I continue taking my beef liver? Can I take more beef liver? Can I take spirulina? What you and I set out to do, and what we've done with Recuperate, is we've built the foundation. We've said copper is the hierarchy. It is the controller of everything else. So what is the best way that we can provide the foundation for 80–90% of the people out there in its most absorbable form? And we did that with Recuperate. We combined desiccated beef liver in its purest form. It's Argentina grass-fed. We used the Hawaiian spirulina, which is the richest copper source in vegan terms for people to get copper from. And then we partnered with Albion Minerals as a supplier to use the most researched form of copper out there, which is copper bisglycinate. And obviously we've added the turmeric to it. So I would just, share with everyone that, too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. A lot of people are asking, is there any fear or any concerns with getting too much copper? I would probably agree with what you said. I think we have a much bigger dilemma of not having enough copper in our soil before we worry about what's going on inside of our body. But can people definitely take additional beef liver on top of this for the nutrients like B vitamins, retinol, and everything else that it provides? Absolutely. The same goes for spirulina. Just make sure you're taking the right sources and the right forms of everything. Like we've discussed before, if it's not the Hawaiian spirulina, you want to stay away from it. And I'm talking, even if it's made within the US, there were studies done of spirulina that came from places in Florida that were tainted with neurotoxins. So you have to know what you're buying. And I think you guys have done a great job of putting together the products and the manual to let people know really what's what. But for people who see something on a shelf and they're like, well, this one says it's spirulina and it's $9, and this one says it's Hawaiian spirulina and it's $20. There's a reason the other one's $20. You'll pay for it later if you don't get the more pure product. So just something for everyone to know is this is meant to be a foundational product. I think we asked the question when we first met or we started putting this together. We said, if people come into the RCP protocol and they did just one thing, what could provide them with copper? What could provide them with B vitamins? What could provide them with retinol? And this product does that. If we could only get them doing one thing. And I really think that's what we came together, and that's where the name Recuperate came from, is recuperating energy. So I thought that was something good to add for people to know, is this is just meant to be the starting point and the foundation. The other items and foods are still very important throughout the protocol.
No, thank you, Mike, for sharing that. What I think is amazing is, as a society, we think nothing about adding iron to our diet, and we're trepidatious about adding copper. And again, it's the conditioning, the propaganda that we've been exposed to, and it's just the opposite. People should be fearful about the amount of iron that's been in their diet for your entire life, and really almost angry about the deprivation of copper. And it's a striking and glaring flip-flop that's occurred in our food system over the course of the last century. So we're trying to do our part. As Mike says, it's a foundational product, and we're trying to do our part to help people begin to make that shift. And we're very excited about it. We really appreciate that you all have taken the time out of your evening and morning and tomorrow and yesterday. But we've got every conceivable time zone, I'm sure, in this call. I really appreciate the interest that you all have. And we're going to continue this dialogue. This is not the last time we'll do this, but very grateful, especially to Shanae, for really conceiving this whole idea. We need a dialogue. We need to have a series of conversations about this. This is very new information. And she was very deliberate about having this very specific time frame, focus, process. And Shanae, I really want to thank you again for all that you've done. And Kristan, it's like I get tired of thanking you, but thank you again for all that you do to keep the ship afloat and keep it moving in the right direction. But our work's not done. We've got lots of new ideas and new directions that we want to take, but we think this is a very important cornerstone for our growth and development. And like I said, we're going to be evolving into a new RCP, and we're very excited about this research side. And we don't know where it's going to lead, but I think the researchers are very intrigued by the questions we're asking. So that's a good sign. So we're very emboldened by that. So I will give it a go and do I turn it back to Shanae or turn it back to Kristan, to the ladies, like, down under, whatever, go for it. Bring us home. That's what we need to do. We need to get home.
Well, I'm going to hand over to Shanae because I think I've talked enough. We've been really busy in the chat answering as many more questions as we could, and I look forward to seeing people in about 20 hours for our formal community Q&A. But other than that, Shanae, would you like to help round us off and we'll finish the Facebook stream very soon as well.
Real quick, Shanae, I just want everyone to know that a lot of people are fat-free. I am chat-free. I cannot do these calls if I'm paying attention to the chat. So I don't know what you all have been saying, but Shanae, I turn it back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Special thanks to Mike. Thank you so much for joining us today and for adding discount codes and answering questions and jumping on and speaking and sharing that with us. Thank you so much for your contribution. I would like to close up by letting you all know that there's an email that will come out. It will have the recording. If you'd like to re-watch it, take notes, press pause, do whatever. Everyone who is here in the Zoom room automatically gets access to that. We'll organize that. You'll get that in a short little while. Anyone who is watching us on the live stream, whether you're watching on Facebook live or you're watching Facebook recording or the YouTube recording of this, please know that if you would like to access a copy of the replay, you will have to register to do so, or you can just rewatch the video. Like if you want us to send you a copy so that you've got it somewhere safe, you will need to register. The last thing, and Kristan mentioned this, is that if you have more questions, there are many more questions than we could possibly get through today. The premium community is the place to get those questions answered. There is one, as Kristan mentioned, a Q&A in 20 hours, give or take, thereabouts, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you would like to continue the conversation and ask questions, that is the place to do that. We will be back again, Morley and I, with our regular live interviews, but thank you for joining us for this very special event. The Recuperate product is new territory, as it's been mentioned, for the RCP. So, there are going to be many more questions. And with your help, what you've done today in asking all of these really wonderful and robust and just diverse questions is you're going to help us to inform our FAQ section. So the team behind the scenes are curating some FAQs on the Recuperate product. So thank you for your questions. We're really grateful for them, and they are going to be informing what is in the FAQ section, which will be available on the RCP website. So thank you everybody for being here. Really grateful for your attendance, for your questions, for your curiosity, for everything. There's lots of sharing happening over in the chat box for your reference, Morley. Lots and lots of success stories and bits and pieces and curiosity, which is really lovely to see. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for taking the time. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.